Northern Ireland in Antrim, and my parents were from, my father was from McClelland and then my mother was from Castle Dawson, and she grew up down the road from Seamus Heaney. The interesting thing was that when I was in school, we didn't do any of the Irish poets. We never did gigs, we didn't talk about Heaney, we didn't do any of that. We were listening to Wordsworth and Keats and all those people. And then I went to Belfast, and I was going to be a teacher, and I went to Stranmillis College at Queen's University, Belfast. And the very first time I heard the poetry of Seamus Heaney, I was late one day, as you know, is my way, to my college Irish fiction class in 1983. And I heard a recognisable voice reading it, and Pat, you might remember Brian Baird, who used to read the evening news on UTV. Well, Brian Baird was my Irish fiction teacher, and I'm forever in his debt for introducing me to the poet whose work has really been so important to me here and back home. And I think if you were to ask me to draw a map of my child world, the one that I moved in before I started primary school, all Seamus Heaney's places would be there. They'd all be marked on it. I belong to those places, and they belong to me. Jim read about Magherafelt, the Lahi, Castle Dawson, the Moyola River, the Moss, Upperlands, the Hillhead, Toome Bridge, Cookstown, the Loch Shore, and the Broagh, where my mother grew up. Broagh, its low tattoo among the windy boar trees and rhubarb blades, ended almost suddenly, like that last GH the strangers found difficult to manage. One of 7 children, now is reared on a farm not too far from the Heaneys, and I was talking to her last weekend, and she remembers the man that Seamus immortalised in Digging, which Norm read this evening, his father Paddy. And she said she can see Paddy Heaney like it was yesterday in his yellow boots and his heavy coat and his walking stick, out trading cattle at the local fairs. And she remembers Seamus as well. She said that he used to ride his bicycle and his face against the wind and his sandy hair just flying behind him. And then there were all the men who peopled his poetry. There was the blacksmith at the forge, and the gypsies down the Lonin, the Thatcher and the diviner. And Brian Baird, my teacher, took us through all those poems and through all those rural places and practices that I knew well, but I'd always taken them for granted. And to tell you the truth, when I went to Belfast, I was a wee bit embarrassed by them. You know, I didn't want to say that I was from there. You know, it felt backward to me. But because of Heaney, I felt a new pride and a new respect for the countryside and the craft of certain men in those parts, men like my father. In the poem, The Diviner, which I'm going to read to you, I'll never forget the day that I saw my dad divine water, or douse for water as they called it, and pulled it so strong where he stood that the stick in his hand was the shape of a wishbone, and it just bent itself in a knot as the water came up. The Diviner. This is for Daddy. Cut from the green hedge a forked hazel stick that he held tight by the arms of the V. Circling his terrain, hunting a pluck of water, nervous but professionally unfussed. The pluck came sharp as a sting, and the rod jerked down with precise convulsions. Spring water was suddenly broadcasting through a green aerial its secret stations. The bystanders were asked to have a try, and he handed them the rod without a word, and it lay dead in their grasp, till nonchalantly he gripped the expectant wrists. The hazel stirred. And I wouldn't be able to read a poem for my father if I didn't read a couple for my mother. As a young mother, she frequently took me up home. We'd get on the bus from Antrim to the Hillhead, and then we'd walk the rest of the way down the Broagh Road, which is where the Heaneys lived. And I remember always being scared of what might be hiding in the rhododendron bushes and the beech and the alder trees that hung over the road. But of course there wasn't anything there to be afraid of, and I think it wasn't until I grew older and the troubles started to boil that there were other things to be afraid of on those roads. Real things, as any of us who have been through roadblocks, I know Pat, you have, we'd wonder what's lurking behind the questions asked by the British soldiers when we would drive home from Castleblossom to Antrim on a Sunday night and dim our lights for them, answering obediently, and waiting for them to release us onto roads, as in this from Heaney's, the Toome Road. One morning early I met armoured cars in convoy, warbling along on powerful tires, all camouflaged with broken alder branches and headphoned soldiers standing up in turrets. How long were they approaching down my roads as if they owned them? But when I was a little girl, I was oblivious to all of that. I stayed at my grandfather's house in the Broagh, and I just absorbed that rustic, rhythmic speech of the men. And it was the men who were cutting turf and digging potatoes and baling hay. And then there were the sighs of my granny. She'd come in with the buckets of water from the pump in the yard, and she'd make bottles of milky tea for the men coming in from the fields. And it's 45 years later, and I can still see her wiping her hands on her apron with a big yellow cardigan on, and a big smile for me, and how she loved me. And I always remember that line from Moss Bawn when Heaney says, "And here is love, like a tinsmith's scoop, sun cast its gleam in the meal bin." And so then there were the long walks down those roads with my granddad, and just wild with bluebells and foxgloves. And on warm days, he'd take me up to McGurk's shop and would buy sweets and ice cream sliders, otherwise known as ice cream sandwiches over here. And sometimes we spotted the gypsies or the tinkers, and Granda called them tinkers, and people think it's a derogatory term, but it really wasn't. It was because they made things out of tin. They were tinsmiths. And I remember thinking that they must live these really charmed lives, just being able to pitch their tents with their colourful clothes and their caravans and their ponies. And then, even as now, and something that really resonates with me in Heaney's poetry, is that idea of always being in between places. And I remember that one of the tinsmiths, his name was Sweeney, and he used to visit my grandmother, and she made him tea, and then in exchange he would bring handmade tins for milking. And the older I get, I find myself pausing to sort of appreciate all those handmade things that Heaney would talk about. I suppose now that I'm 50, I'm a bit like him, waiting until I was nearly 50 to credit marvels. The one thing that I shared with Seamus Heaney, and Pat alluded to it earlier, was this whole phenomenon of being the first person in your family to go away to school. And none of us had gone away to school. My mother and father left school when they were 13 as well. And in Stepping Stones I read where Heaney told Dennis O'Driscoll, even Belfast was far away to me. In those days I was outside the loop. My family had no familiarity with universities, no sense of the choices that there were, no will to go beyond the known procedures, and no confidence, for example, about phoning up the local education authority and seeking clarification about what was possible. There was no phone, for God's sake. A university education in Belfast was a world away from the Broagh and necessitated a kind of verbal dance with his mother when he returned from it to the family home. He had come home with his new knowledge, new words, and new sensitivities, and I can almost picture him in that tight space between elevated and plain speech, watching every word he says, weighing its impact before he utters it. And my mother and I have danced that dance, and still do to this day. And you understand that this comes from Clearances, the sonnets that he wrote for his mother. Fear of affectation made her affect inadequacy whenever it came to pronouncing words beyond her, told Broagh. She'd manage something hampered and askew every time, as if she might betray the hampered and inadequate by a too well-adjusted vocabulary. With more challenge than pride, she'd tell me, you know all them things. So I governed my tongue in front of her, a genuinely well-adjusted, adequate betrayal of what I knew better. I'd gnaw and I indecently relapse into the wrong grammar, which kept us allied and at bay. And then the other one from Clearance is another, which I love. I think that those of us, especially those of us from home, ironing sheets and folding sheets, ironing shirts, all those mundane tasks that Heaney writes about, he really transformed them into magical spots of time. And every once in a while when I do laundry, which really is every once in a while, I can see her with, these big armfuls of sheets and towels that she's rescued from the clothesline before the rain begins to fall. And then there's the folding, and it's that very precise ritual. My father's or her partner in a dance, and they fold the sheets edge to edge, the way we all do. And anyway, this is the poem from Clearance's, and you hear Seamus Heaney remembering his own mother. The cool that came off the sheets just off the line made me think the damp must still be in them. But when I took my corners of the linen and pulled against her, first straight down the hem and then diagonally, then flapped and shook the fabric like a sail in a crosswind, they made a dried-out, undulating thwack. So we'd stretch and fold and end up hand to hand, and for a split second, as if nothing had happened, for nothing had that had not always happened beforehand, day by day, just touch and go, coming close again by holding back in moves where I was X and she was O, inscribed in sheets, sheets sewn from ripped out flower sacks. The last one is the one that Chaz asked me to read, and the woman who spoke at the beginning talked about it. And it's another dance that we all learned to do in Northern Ireland, and those of us born and reared there have this mutual need to know right from the beginning about a person's background, so we know how to proceed in the dialogue, in the longer relationship path across. Because you don't want to say the wrong thing or the wrong word, or they might know what foot you kick with. So it boils down to the schools we attended, our last names, the housing estates where we lived, the way we pronounce an H or a H or A or A. And all of these things become clues to establish who we are. Derry, Londonderry, the Troubles, the Struggle, Ulster, the Six Counties, all of that. Which leads me to the last poem, and Pat and I were talking about it this evening. I was surprised that he didn't do this one. From Whatever You Say Nothing. I'm writing just after an encounter with an English journalist in search of views on the Irish thing. I'm back in winter quarters where bad news is no longer news, where media men and stringers sniff and point, where zoom lenses, recorders, and coiled leads litter the hotels. The times are out of joint, but I incline as much to rosary beads as to the jottings and analyses of politicians and newspaper men who've scribbled down the long campaign from gas and protest to gelignite instead, who proved upon their pulses escalate, backlash, crackdown, the provisional wing, polarization, long-standing hate. Yet I live here too. I sing, expertly civil-tongued with civil neighbours on the high wires of first wireless reports, sucking the fake taste, the stony flavours of those sanctioned old elaborate retorts, Oh, it's disgraceful, surely, I agree. Where's it going to end? It's getting worse. Well, they're murderers. Internment, understandably. The voice of sanity is getting hoarse. Religion's never mentioned here, of course. You know them by their eyes and hold your tongue. One side's as bad as the other, never worse. Christ, it's near time that some small leak was sprung in the great dikes the Dutchman made to dam the dangerous tide that followed Seamus. For all this art and sedentary trade, I am incapable. The famous northern reticence, the tight gag of place and times, yes, yes. Of the wee sticks I sing, where to be saved, you only must save face, and whatever you say nothing. Smoke signals are loudmouthed compared with us, maneuverings to find out name in school, subtle discrimination by addresses with hardly an exception to the rule that Norman, Ken, and Sydney signalled to God, and Seamus, call me Sean, with surefire pip. O land of password, hand grip, wink and nod, of open minds as open as a trap, where tongues lie coiled as under flame-line wicks, where half of us, as in a wooden horse, were cabined and confined like wily Greeks, besieged within the siege, whispering Morse. This morning, from the Dewey motorway, I saw the new camp for the internees. A bomb had left a crater of fresh clay in the roadside, and over in the trees, machine gun posts defined a rail stockade. There was that white mist you get on a low ground, and it was a deja vu, some film made of Stalag 17, a bad dream with no sound. Is there a life before death? That's chalked up in Ballymurphy. Competence with pain, coherent miseries, a bite and a suck. We hug our little destiny again.